The clock on the wall showed 11:47 p.m., but David wasn't even close to falling asleep. He had been lying in his old bed for over 3 hours now, just staring at the ceiling he knew so well from his childhood. The same crack ran across the corner where it met the wall, and the same water stain shaped like a cloud still marked the spot where the roof had leaked years ago. Everything in this room looked exactly the same as when he was 16, but nothing felt right anymore. His mother had kept his bedroom exactly as he left it when he moved out for college 15 years ago. The same blue curtains, the same wooden desk where he used to do homework, even the same basketball trophies lined up on the shelf. But tonight, being back in this familiar space felt strange and empty. 3 weeks had passed since his father died suddenly from a heart attack. 3 weeks of funeral planning, paperwork, phone calls, and trying to be strong for his mom. 3 weeks of people saying they were sorry for his loss, bringing casseroles and telling him that time heals all wounds. But here he was at midnight, wide awake and feeling more tired than he had ever felt in his life. David rolled over and looked at the digital clock again. 11:52 p.m. He sighed and sat up against his headboard, running his hands through his hair. Sleep had become his enemy. Every night was the same story. He would lie down, close his eyes, and then his mind would start racing with memories, regrets, and all the things he wished he had said to his dad. The house made its familiar nighttime sounds around him. The old wooden floors creaked as they settled. The refrigerator hummed downstairs in the kitchen, and somewhere outside a dog was barking in the distance. These were the same sounds he remembered from being a kid, when he would sneak out of bed to get a glass of water or when he had trouble sleeping before a big test at school. But now these sounds felt different. They reminded him that his father would never again walk down that creaky hallway to check on him. Dad would never again peek his head into this room and ask if everything was okay. Those days were gone forever, and the house seemed to know it too. David picked up the book from his nightstand that he had been trying to read for the past hour. It was one of those mystery novels his dad used to love, with a detective solving crimes in a small town. He thought maybe reading something his father enjoyed would help him feel closer to him somehow. But the words just swam around on the page, and he couldn't focus on the story at all. His mind kept wandering back to the last conversation he had with his dad. It was just a regular phone call on a Tuesday afternoon. They talked about work, the weather, and his mom's garden. Nothing deep or meaningful, just everyday father and son talk. If David had known it would be their last conversation, he would have said so much more. He would have told his dad how much he respected him, how grateful he was for everything he had taught him, and how he hoped to be half the man his father was. The worst part was all the unfinished business between them. David had always planned to have those important conversations someday. The talks about life, about what really mattered, about the mistakes they both had made and forgiven each other for. He always thought there would be more time for all of that. Time was something you never think about running out of, until it's already gone. David closed the book and set it back on the nightstand next to a glass of water that had been sitting there untouched for hours. He looked around his childhood room again, taking in all the details. The poster of his favorite basketball player was still taped to the wall, slightly curled at the corners. His old guitar sat in the corner, probably out of tune after all these years. A stack of his high school yearbook sat on the desk, full of signatures from classmates he barely remembered now. This room held so many memories of growing up, of becoming the person he was today. His dad had helped him paint these walls when he turned 14. They had spent an entire Saturday working together, getting more paint on themselves than on the walls, laughing about their lack of painting skills. His mom had made them sandwiches for lunch, and they ate them sitting on the floor surrounded by paint cans and brushes. Now David was 34 years old, a successful architect living in the city, with his own apartment and his own life. But being back in this room made him feel like that teenager again, the one who thought his parents would always be there, who believed that home would never change, who took for granted that there would always be tomorrow. The truth was, he had been having trouble sleeping for weeks now, not just since he came back to his childhood home. Even in his own apartment in the city, sleep wouldn't come. He would lie there thinking about all the phone calls he should have made, all the visits he should have planned, All the time he had wasted being too busy with his career to really connect with his family. His mom was handling everything much better than he was. She cried, of course, but she also seemed to have found a kind of peace with his father's passing. She talked about him with love and warmth, sharing funny stories and happy memories. She seemed to understand something about grief that David couldn't quite grasp yet. Maybe it was because she had been married to his dad for 38 years, and David was still learning how to process losing the first real hero he had ever known. The clock now showed 12:15 a.m., and David knew this was going to be another long, sleepless night. David was just starting to drift off when he heard something that made his eyes snap open. It was the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside his room. Soft, careful steps that seemed to be moving slowly toward his door. For a moment, he thought, it might be his mother getting up for a glass of water or checking the locks on the front door like she always did before bed. But these footsteps sounded different. They were lighter, more deliberate, like someone was trying very hard not to make any noise. David held his breath and listened carefully. The steps stopped right outside his door, and he could see a shadow moving under the crack of light that came from the hallway nightlight his mother always kept on. His bedroom door had been left slightly open, maybe about 6 inches, the way he used to keep it when he was a kid. He never liked having it completely closed because it made him feel trapped, but he didn't want it wide open either. Now, as he watched in the dim light, he saw the door slowly begin to open wider. David's heart started beating faster. Who could be in their house at this hour? His mother was a sound sleeper and rarely got up during the night. Maybe someone had broken in. But that didn't make sense because he hadn't heard any doors opening or closing, no sounds of anyone forcing their way inside. Plus, their neighborhood was one of the safest in town, the kind of place where people still left their doors unlocked sometimes. The door continued to open inch by inch, so slowly that David wondered if maybe he was imagining things. Maybe it was just the old house settling, or maybe a breeze from somewhere was pushing it open. But then he saw something that made him realize this was definitely not his imagination. A figure appeared in the doorway. It was the silhouette of a person shorter than average, moving with slow but steady steps. In the dim light filtering in from the hallway, David could make out that it was an elderly woman wearing what looked like a long nightgown or robe. She stood in his doorway for a moment, as if she was making sure she had the right room. David was completely frozen. He didn't know whether to speak up, pretend to be asleep, or jump out of bed. His mind was racing with questions. Who was this person? How did she get into the house? What did she want? But something about her presence didn't feel threatening or scary. There was something almost familiar about the way she moved, something that made him feel curious rather than afraid. The woman stepped into his room with surprising grace for someone her age. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, David began to recognize who she was. It was Mrs. Chen, the elderly neighbor who had lived next door for as long as he could remember. She was probably in her late 70s now, a tiny woman with silver hair who spent most of her time tending to the most beautiful garden on the entire street. Mrs. Chen had always been like an extra grandmother to David when he was growing up. She would bring over homemade cookies during the holidays, help his mother with her garden, and always had a warm smile and a kind word whenever she saw him. His father had helped her with various repairs around her house over the years, fixing her fence when storms knocked it down, carrying heavy bags of soil for her flower beds, and shoveling her driveway in the winter. But what was she doing in his bedroom at midnight? How had she even gotten into the house? David wanted to ask these questions, but something about the calm way she moved made him stay quiet and just watch to see what would happen next. Mrs. Chen walked across his room like she knew exactly where she was going. She moved past his desk, past the pile of clothes he had thrown on the chair, and came to stand right beside his bed. In the soft light coming through his curtains, David could see her face more clearly now. Her expression was gentle and knowing, like she understood something important that he didn't understand yet. She was wearing a simple white nightgown that looked like it was made of soft cotton, and her long silver hair was braided down her back. Her feet were bare, which explained why her footsteps had been so quiet in the hallway. She looked down at David with eyes that seemed to hold years of wisdom and experience. eyes that had seen both joy and sorrow, eyes that recognized pain when they saw it. David opened his mouth to say something, maybe to ask if she was okay or if she needed help with something, but Mrs. Chen held up one small hand in a gentle gesture that seemed to say, "Wait," or "It's okay," or maybe, "Trust me." There was something so peaceful about her presence that David found himself relaxing instead of worrying. She stood there beside his bed for what felt like several minutes, but was probably only 30 seconds or so. Then, without saying a word, she did something that David never could have expected in a million years. Mrs. Chen sat down on the edge of his bed, right there next to where he was lying, as naturally as if she belonged there. When Mrs. Chen sat down on the edge of his bed, David felt the mattress dip slightly under her weight. She was such a small woman that the movement was barely noticeable, but somehow her presence filled the entire room with a sense of calm that he hadn't felt in weeks. She didn't ask for permission, didn't offer any explanation for why she was there, and didn't seem to think there was anything unusual about visiting someone's bedroom in the middle of the night. David watched in amazement as she slowly lay down, on top of his covers, staying on her side of the bed but close enough that he could feel the warmth of another person nearby. She positioned herself carefully, making sure to maintain a respectful distance while still offering the comfort of her presence. It was like she had done this many times before, like she knew exactly how to provide comfort without making anyone feel uncomfortable. The strangest part was that none of this felt strange at all. David had always been a private person, someone who liked his personal space and didn't usually feel comfortable with people he wasn't very close to. But having Mrs. Chen lying there beside him felt as natural as breathing. It was like having his grandmother there, or maybe a favorite aunt who understood him better than he understood himself. She turned her head toward him, and in the soft light coming through his bedroom window, David could see her face clearly. Mrs. Chen was smiling, but it wasn't the kind of smile people give you when they're trying to cheer you up or make you feel better. It wasn't the sad, pitying smile that so many people had given him over the past few weeks, the one that made him feel like a broken person who needed to be fixed. This smile was different. It was warm and knowing, like she could see right into his heart and understood exactly what he was going through. Her eyes held a kind of wisdom that only comes from living a long life and experiencing both great happiness and deep sorrow. There was no judgment in her expression, no expectation that he should be feeling better by now or that he should be handling his grief differently. David felt something he hadn't experienced since his father died. Peace. Real, genuine peace that seemed to flow from Mrs. Chen and wrap around him like a soft blanket. His racing thoughts began to slow down. His tense muscles started to relax, and for the first time in weeks, he felt like maybe everything was going to be okay eventually. He wanted to thank her, to ask her how she knew he needed this, to tell her how much her presence meant to him. But somehow words seemed unnecessary. Mrs. Chen's smile told him that she already knew all of those things, that she didn't need him to explain or express gratitude, that she was there simply because she wanted to be there. As they lay there, in comfortable silence, David began to remember all the times Mrs. Chen had been there for his family over the years. When he was 8 years old and broke his arm falling off his bike, she had appeared at their front door with homemade soup and flowers from her garden. When his mother was sick with pneumonia one winter, Mrs. Chen had come over every day to help with cooking and cleaning. When David graduated from high school, she had given him a small potted plant and told him it would bring him good luck in college. She had always been there in the background of his life, a constant presence of kindness and care, but he had never really thought about what her own life was like, what struggles she might be facing, or what wisdom she had gained from her many years of living. Now lying here in the darkness with her peaceful presence beside him, David realized that Mrs. Chen was so much more than just the nice neighbor lady who grew beautiful flowers. There was something almost magical about the way she had appeared tonight, at exactly the moment when he needed comfort the most. It was like she had some kind of sixth sense that told her when people were hurting and needed help. Maybe that was just what happened when you lived a long life and paid attention to the people around you. Maybe you developed the ability to recognize pain and loneliness and know just what to do about it. David found his eyelids getting heavy for the first time in weeks. The anxiety and restlessness that had been keeping him awake every night seemed to melt away in the presence of this wise, caring woman. His breathing became deeper and more relaxed, matching the gentle rhythm of Mrs. Chen's own breathing beside him. He thought about how his father would have reacted if he could see this scene. Dad had always said that Mrs. Chen was an angel in disguise, someone who appeared whenever people needed her most. He used to joke that she had supernatural powers when it came to knowing exactly when to show up with food, help, or just a friendly conversation. But maybe it wasn't supernatural at all. Maybe it was just what happened when someone spent their whole life caring about other people and paying attention to their needs. As David drifted closer to sleep, he felt grateful in a way he hadn't experienced since before his father died. Grateful for neighbors who cared. Grateful for unexpected kindness. Grateful for the reminder that even in the darkest moments, there were still people in the world who would show up to help carry your burden. Mrs. Chen's presence beside him was like a gentle reminder that he wasn't alone in his grief, that there were people who understood loss and pain and healing, and that sometimes the most powerful medicine was simply knowing that someone else cared enough to be there with you in the darkness. After what felt like an hour of peaceful silence, Mrs. Chen began to speak. Her voice was soft and gentle, barely above a whisper, with the slight accent that David remembered from his childhood. She spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully, as if each one was precious and needed to be handled with care. "Your father was a good man," she said, her eyes still looking up at the ceiling. "I remember the first day your family moved to this house. You were just 7 years old running around the yard with so much energy. Your father came over to introduce himself and asked if there was anything he could do to help us feel welcome in the neighborhood." David turned his head to look at her, surprised by how clearly she remembered that day. He had some fuzzy memories of moving to this house, but mostly he just remembered being excited about having his own room and a bigger backyard to play in. "He saw me struggling with my garden hose one morning," Mrs. Chen continued, a small smile crossing her face. "It was all twisted and heavy and I couldn't get the water to reach my flower beds. Without saying a word, your father came over and spent 20 minutes untangling that hose and showing me a better way to lay it out so it wouldn't get twisted again." David smiled too, because that sounded exactly like something his dad would do. He was always the kind of person who noticed when someone needed help and just quietly stepped in to make things better. He never made a big deal about it or expected any thanks. He just saw a problem and fixed it because that's who he was. "Every winter after that," Mrs. Chen went on, "he would shovel my driveway before he did his own. I would wake up in the morning and see that the snow was already cleared, and I knew it was your father. When I tried to thank him, he would just wave his hand and say that's what neighbors do for each other." As she spoke, more memories came flooding back to David. He remembered seeing his dad outside early on snowy mornings, working with his shovel before the sun was fully up. At the time, David had thought his father was just eager to get their own driveway cleared so they could get to work and school on time. He never realized that his dad was taking care of Mrs. Chen's property first. "The summer when you were 15, Mrs. Chen said, a big storm knocked down part of my fence. I was so worried about how I would pay to fix it, because I was living on just my retirement money. The next Saturday morning, your father showed up with wood and tools. He spent the entire weekend rebuilding that fence, and he wouldn't take a penny for it." David remembered that weekend now. His dad had told him and his mom that he was going to help Mrs. Chen with a small repair project, but David had been too busy with his teenage life to pay much attention. He had no idea that his father had rebuilt an entire section of fence for free. "He always asked about my son," Mrs. Chen continued, and her voice became softer, more distant. "My boy lived far away in California, and your father knew I missed him. Every time we talked, he would ask if I had heard from him recently, if he was doing well, if there was anything I needed help with since my son couldn't be here." David noticed that Mrs. Chen was talking about her son in the past tense, and something in her tone made him realize that there was more to this story. He wanted to ask about it, but he sensed that she would tell him when she was ready. 3 months ago," Mrs. Chen said, her voice barely audible now, "I got a phone call from a police officer in Los Angeles. My son had been driving home from work when another driver ran a red light. The accident happened so fast that he didn't suffer, but he was gone instantly. David felt his heart break for this sweet woman lying beside him. He had been so wrapped up in his own grief that he hadn't even known she was going through the same terrible loss. While he was struggling with sleepless nights and painful memories, Mrs. Chen had been dealing with her own nightmare just next door. "I haven't been sleeping well since then," she admitted. "Every night I walk around my house trying to find some peace. Tonight I saw your light on again, and I recognized that restless feeling. It's the same feeling I have when the sadness gets too heavy to carry alone." Now David understood why she had come to his room tonight. It wasn't just about comforting him. She needed comfort too. She had seen a kindred spirit in his sleepless nights and realized that sometimes the best way to heal your own pain is to help someone else heal theirs. "Your father came to see me after I got that terrible phone call," Mrs. Chen continued. "He brought soup that your mother had made, and he sat with me while I cried. He told me about how proud he was of you, how you had grown into such a successful and caring man. He said he worried sometimes that he hadn't told you often enough how much he loved you and believed in you." These words hit David like a physical blow to his chest. His father had been proud of him, had worried about not expressing his love enough. All this time, David had been torturing himself with regret about things left unsaid, never knowing that his father had been feeling the same way. "Sometimes," Mrs. Chen said gently, "the people we love know how much we care about them, even when we don't say it out loud. Love has a way of showing itself in actions, in small kindnesses, in the way someone's face lights up when they see you. Your father's love for you was visible to everyone who knew your family." As Mrs. Chen's gentle words filled the darkness around them, David felt something shift inside his chest. It was like a knot that had been tied tight for weeks was finally beginning to loosen. Her breathing had become slow and steady beside him, and for the first time since his father's death, David felt his own body truly relaxing. The comfort of having someone who understood his pain lying next to him was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't just that Mrs. Chen was there, physically, but that she truly knew what it felt like to lose someone you love suddenly and completely. She understood the guilt, the regret, the endless questions about what you could have done differently. David's eyelids grew heavy as he listened to the gentle rhythm of her breathing. Outside his window he could hear the first birds beginning to chirp, which meant dawn was still a few hours away. But for the first time in weeks he wasn't dreading the long hours until morning. Instead, he felt himself sinking into the kind of deep, peaceful sleep that he had forgotten was possible. When David finally opened his eyes, sunlight was streaming through his bedroom curtains. The digital clock showed 8:30 a.m., which meant he had slept for almost 8 straight hours. He couldn't remember the last time he had slept that long or that deeply. For a moment he felt confused about why he felt so rested and peaceful. Then he remembered Mrs. Chen. David turned to look at the other side of his bed, but she was gone. The covers were smooth and undisturbed, as if no one had been lying there at all. For a second he wondered if the whole thing had been a dream, some kind of wishful thinking created by his grieving mind. But then he saw something that made him realize it had all been completely real. On his nightstand, next to the glass of water and the book he hadn't been able to read, sat a small potted orchid. It was one of the most beautiful flowers he had ever seen, with delicate white petals that seemed to glow in the morning sunlight. The pot was simple and elegant, made of light blue ceramic that matched the peaceful feeling David had in his heart. Beside the orchid was a small piece of paper folded neatly in half. David reached over and picked it up, unfolding it carefully. In Mrs. Chen's neat handwriting it said, "For new beginnings. Your father would be proud of the man you've become. Thank you for letting me share your peace last night." David held the note for a long time, reading it over and over again. He thought about how Mrs. Chen had appeared at exactly the moment when he needed her most, how she had offered comfort without being asked, and how she had shared her own pain in a way that made his feel less overwhelming. Over the next few days, as David continued helping his mother with arrangements and preparing to eventually return to his life in the city, he found himself thinking about Mrs. Chen often. He made sure to visit her every morning, bringing coffee and pastries from the bakery downtown. They would sit in her beautiful garden and talk about their memories, their losses, and their hopes for the future. Mrs. Chen told him more stories about his father, little acts of kindness and generosity that David had never known about. She shared how his dad had always asked about her health, had helped her carry groceries when her arthritis was bothering her, and had even fixed her kitchen faucet when it started leaking last year. In return, David told Mrs. Chen about his life in the city, his work as an architect and his dreams of designing buildings that would make people feel happy and peaceful. She listened with the same gentle attention she had shown that night in his bedroom, asking thoughtful questions and offering quiet wisdom. What surprised David most was how much helping Mrs. Chen helped him process his own grief. When he focused on making sure she was okay, when he listened to her stories and shared his own, when he helped her with small tasks around her house, he felt more connected to his father's memory than he had since the funeral. He realized that his dad had found the same thing. By taking care of Mrs. Chen and other neighbors over the years, his father had been living out his values of kindness, community, and service. David began to understand that one way to honor his father's memory was to continue that tradition of caring for the people around him. On the morning before David was scheduled to drive back to the city, Mrs. Chen invited him over for tea. They sat in her kitchen, surrounded by windows that looked out onto her magnificent garden, and she told him something that would stay with him forever. "Grief is like tending a garden," she said, pouring hot tea into delicate china cups. "At first, everything feels dead and empty, like nothing will ever grow again. But if you are patient, if you water it with memories and tend it with love, new things begin to bloom. Not the same things that were there before, but something different and beautiful." David looked out at her garden, which was full of flowers, in every color imaginable. Each plant had been carefully chosen and lovingly cared for over many years. He could see that some areas had been replanted recently, where old plants had died and new ones had taken their place. "The orchid I gave you," Mrs. Chen continued, "came from a cutting of my son's favorite plant. When he was little, he helped me plant the original orchid, and we watched it grow together. Now every time it blooms, I feel like he's still with me in some way." David understood what she was trying to tell him. The love he had for his father didn't have to die with his father's death. It could be transformed into something new, something that continued to grow and bloom and bring beauty into the world. When David finally drove back to his apartment in the city, he took the orchid with him. He placed it on the windowsill in his bedroom, where it would get plenty of morning sunlight. Every day when he woke up, he would see those beautiful white petals and remember not just his father, but also the unexpected angel who had appeared at his darkest moment to remind him that he was not alone in his grief. The sleepless nights didn't disappear completely, but they became less frequent and less frightening. When David did have trouble sleeping, he would think about Mrs. Chen's gentle presence, her wise words, and her reminder that sometimes the best way to heal your own heart is to help heal someone else's. And in the months that followed, whenever David heard about someone who was struggling with loss or loneliness, he tried to be the kind of neighbor his father had been, the kind of friend Mrs. Chen had been to him. He learned that midnight visits don't always require an invitation, that sometimes the most powerful healing happens in silence, and that the love we give to others has a way of coming back to us when we need it most.